The second panel for the day is going to focus on stories of getting hired, tips to get through, get out the door, if you will, if you're a paratrooper, or get through the breach, if you're a tanker, through the interview process. And so what we got is hiring managers, recruiters, HR professionals from various different organizations. I've mentioned Smith and, from my right, your left, going across, we've got Smith and Nephew, Olympus, Minatronics, Abiomed, and Stryker. So you're going to have 5 different perspectives. Everyone's got a story to share. And as I talked about, in the beginning, not everybody up here is a veteran. And that's a good thing, because we have to change the lens by which we view things. Veterans can be sometimes over-compassionate with one another. And sometimes it's good to hear the hard truth about some of the challenges that we may face going through the process. And so we're looking forward to hearing their stories and their dialogue, and then sharing their lessons learned and best practices to make you the most successful and competitive candidate you can be. So moving forward, I'm just going to ask, starting with Shelley, to go ahead and just introduce herself, tell a little bit about herself, and we'll move on down the line to Chris. Shelley?
Hello, everybody. My name is Shelly Martin. I am the Senior Director for Talent Acquisition for the Americas region for Smith & Nephew. I have been with Smith & Nephew for a total of 11 years. I'm actually a boomerang employee. So I started with Smith & Nephew early in my career, went to work for another company, a specialty pharmacy, also medical type of a company, which was important to me, but gave me a little bit different experience, and I came back to Smith & Nephew about 6 years ago now. I am based in Memphis, Tennessee. However, I am from the New England area originally. I'm sure you can tell from my accent. So, love Boston and love the area, and happy to be here. Hopefully, I have some things to share with you that might help you along the way. I have tremendous respect for all of you in the room. It's humbling to look through your resumes and to see your service and the contribution that you've made to our country. So thank you.
Kim?
Oh, sorry.
Good afternoon. My name is Kim Morris. I work for Olympus, Olympus Corporation of Americas. We are a global company. We're a med tech company, also in life science. We also are the camera company. And also, we do surgical. So we have about 6,000 employees worldwide. Our office is in Center Valley, Pennsylvania. That is our corporate location. I work out of our Waltham location, Waltham, Massachusetts. We also have a surgical device company in Littleton, Mass. And also our endoscopy is in Southborough. As I said, we're a global company. We're celebrating 100 years of service this year. I am not a veteran. I do, however, have a son who is a disabled vet. He was in the Air Force for 6 years. I'm going to get emotional. He's home now. He's okay. He really struggled when he transitioned out of the military for many reasons. He felt like he didn't belong. He didn't know how to do things like manage his finances, which the finance piece was awesome today. But they did help him with his education. He graduated last week with his bachelor's degree in fire science because he's a firefighter paramedic. So I, too, have all the respect in the world for everything you've done and really appreciate everything.
Hi, I'm Derek Daly. I work at Minatronics Medical. We're a medical technology company in St. Paul, Minnesota. We help our customers commercialize their medical devices. Before Minatronics, I worked in a few other medical device suppliers and companies around New England area, and before that, I was in the Marine Corps for about 14 years. Eager to talk about this topic, and thanks, Jason and the team. I think the transitioning out of the military is challenging for the smartest people I know. I'm certainly not one of them, but even for people that have everything together and have their ducks in a row and have a great plan, it's still it's so unique, and it's such a unknown world to a lot of folks, particularly for me, having went in the Marine Corps out of high school and spent that much time in there, and then had zero exposure to what goes on in the real world. So I think somebody said earlier, I didn't even know what these companies did or what the functions in the companies were. I can totally relate to that. So thank you for the work that the group's doing and for the folks that made it here to help out. It's much appreciated by me, and I'm sure the other people that I've been out since 11. It took me until about yesterday to figure out, like, hey, I got my crap together. This is great. But for the folks that don't, helping them is awesome. So appreciate that.
Awesome. Thank you. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Abby Bartley, and like Steve, I work at Abiomed in Danvers, Mass. We're a medical device developer and manufacturer of Impella, a Class 3 medical device, the world's smallest heart pump. So just want to thank Jason and the team from MVP Vets for being here today, for allowing us to participate, and thank you all for your service. I've been at Abiomed about 1.5 years, and I do recruit for more of the technical positions within the organization. So I deal daily with a lot of engineers, but also a lot of folks in finance, IT, and I think it's really interesting. This space offers a whole host of opportunities. So by virtue of what you've all done, I feel very unqualified to share any advice with all of you. But if anything that I or we say today might help you, it would really be an honor. So thank you very much.
Hi, Christy Foer. I commissioned through West Point in 2004. Spent 8 years in the Army, infantry guy. I did my platoon leader time out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina with the 82nd, and then did my company command time with the 25th. Commanded a Stryker company. Then I got out of the military, moved to Stryker. They don't manufacture the Stryker vehicles or medical devices, obviously, but that's been my experience so far. I spent 5 years right now with Stryker. I spent the first 4 years in operations, and over the last couple of years, I've taken on more commercial-facing roles across the supply chain.
You know, one of the things that I think veterans struggle with, and I'd be interested in the comments from the panelists as we continue, is most veterans are hesitant about the life sciences because they're afraid that they don't have the degrees or the specialty skills or the medical background to be competitive in the industry. And the way I kind of frame the discussion when I hear that question is, okay, what kind of, you were part of a unit, right? A battalion or a brigade or a regiment or on a ship. And there were all these different functions that required that organization required to move forward or attack in a specific direction. And the medical device industry, biotech, pharma, they're the same thing. Those organizations are just like battalions or just like regiments or ships, and they have all these different functions. So there is always a place for where a veteran can fit inside of that organization. Yes, absolutely, just like in some of the units, depending on where you are, there will be a surgeon, there will be a lawyer, and sometimes those require additional professional credentials. But for a veteran, you have the credentials to pretty much be a good fit, and then you're going to have to then build from there. So you can cut; they'll help cut that initial foxhole, if you will, and then you can continue to improve it along the way. But there is a place for veterans, and so as you share your stories, on how you've seen veterans come in and move through your organizations or to interviews, just if you could expand on that a little bit. This person may not have been the right fit, but we knew that they had the skill set to kind of move forward, if that's something that you'd seen. First question. So, we talked about with the veteran panel about preparing for the transition. And so now here we are. They've made it through. They've got a recommendation from someone in their company. They're getting ready to go to the interview. So as you prepare the members of the interview panel and yourself, if you're sitting or recording or whatnot, taking notes, how have you seen others prepare, or you prepare members from your organization in going through the interview process? If you could kind of share that background and context, and we'll start with Shelley.
First, in looking at an individual's resume, LinkedIn profile, really looking for through the resume at key projects. I mean, could be cost savings, could be introducing new models, different things that really relate to the job that you're looking for. So being able to pull that out of somebody's resume is clearly what we do. We have standard interview questions that we use, and we do that, one, to ensure that we've got a consistent candidate experience. So we're giving all candidates a fair chance to interview for that role. But by looking at the individual's resume and kind of picking those key things out, we can clearly ask follow-up questions and clarifying questions to really get a good understanding of the individual's experience and how that would relate to the role that we're looking for. Obviously, as somebody interviews for a role, they're interviewing with various different individuals. So ensuring that each one of those interviewers is prepared, knows specifically the areas that they need to drill down and get more information on. And then, at the end of that process, then we all kind of come back together to compare, experience, compare notes, and certainly evaluate that candidate collaboratively. So that's pretty much the process that we would go through.
So at Olympus, we have an actual talent acquisition team, which consists of about 40 talent acquisition specialists. And when a position is posted and a candidate applies for it, then we also give them a list of standard questions, and they phone screen the candidates first. The second step is the ones who meet the qualifications and are a good fit for the position will then be forwarded on to the hiring manager. And then HR will meet with the hiring manager and make sure that we go over the resume to make sure that it is a fit for the position and that they have the required skills. And then we set up a phone call for the manager to speak to the candidate themselves. And they may meet with 2 or 3 different parts of the business depending on what the position is. And then again, as she said, we have a wrap-up discussion afterwards and narrow down the candidates and see who we're going to move forward with.
So interesting takes. One thing that's a little bit unique about Minitronics and maybe a good segue for us is a lot of the med tech companies that are talking today are major OEMs that have really well-defined processes. Medical device industry is made up of thousands, maybe tens of thousands of companies that aren't household names, which not to belittle that, but there's many companies out there that are 50 people, that are 300 people, or in that size range, and those processes are probably far less formal. So at Minitronics, we're about 300 people. We're more on the formal side, and certainly more formal than I would think other companies that I've had experience with that are our size. So sometimes it's just you have a couple interactions with the people that you'll probably be working with or for, and there's less of the filtering aspect of it and more of a, what do you think of this job? Do you think you can do this job? Tell me about yourself. Tell me how you fit into it, and a little bit more personable and less trying to select keywords out of a resume and make sure that everybody gets the exact same shake at the opportunity. Not that one's better than others, but preparation for each avenue is probably distinctly different, and knowing what you're gonna sort of be asked to do and how that interview is going to go in advance of it will help you prepare for it. So smaller companies, most likely less formal, and most likely one-on-one with the folks you'll be working with. That's probably more how it is at Minitronics, I would say.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So Abiomed is probably someplace between a Stryker and a Minitronic. We're sort of a teenager in the med device space. So we've spent a lot of work over the last few years developing a recruiting process. So what will happen is when the job need arises, the assigned recruiter would meet with the hiring manager and really try to learn as much from them about what they're looking for, and be able to translate that effectively to then when they're talking to candidates like you. So during that conversation, we would talk a lot about, okay, here are the minimum qualifications that one needs to meet, but beyond that, what are the soft skills that are really required for success? And in the veteran panel, I heard a lot mentioned that was really spot on. So we hire for fit and for those sort of unseen qualities that make somebody really an all-star in the role. So in the interview process, the recruiter would actually, before interviews begin, meet with the hiring team and sort of assign areas to each person for a good candidate experience, and so that not everyone is asking the same thing. We use a method of hiring called behavioral interviewing. That's pretty common, but it essentially asks you to pull upon examples from your past experiences, which is actually great for all of you, that illustrate the quality that the hiring manager is trying to get at. So even if you might not exactly have that ideal experience, be prepared to sort of acknowledge that and then respond with an example of something that does illustrate that quality. And from there, we would interview the candidates and have a debrief, really in-depth discussion about how they did against those qualities we're looking for, and hopefully be able to make an effective hire from there.
I agree with everything said so far. Maybe just one little different thing that I would do, just being a veteran myself. So knowing a lot of times when we put resumes in front of interview panels that are veteran resumes, it's a completely different language. Just like you don't understand the corporate environment, they don't understand the military environment. So it's all jargon that makes no sense to them. So I know at least inside of Stryker, we have a pretty strong veteran outreach program where we'll spend a lot of time trying to translate what all that is on that resume, what's that translate into corporate capabilities. So for example, if you're a platoon leader, company commander, have a lot of experience in there, that sets you up for success for a lot of roles and operations leadership type settings. If you're a Navy nuke, you've got a lot of technical expertise, which might lean really well to engineering type roles. So inside of Stryker, that's one of the things we really try to go when we go to these types of conferences, really look at what is these resumes and help our civilian counterparts really understand what they really mean, so we have better chances of hiring veterans into our organization.
Yeah, great. Thanks for all the feedback from everybody. I mean, I think one thing to just kind of capitalize on that sometimes we as veterans don't understand when we're in uniform is the importance of LinkedIn. I actually didn't do it for 20 years, and then I randomly decided to do it one day because I was given some time to actually think and stop doing all the time. And that is absolutely huge. And if you haven't committed the time to make that professional profile important to you, you need to in your transition process. The exchanging of cards, just a couple of quick clicks, and how that presents is just like in the Army they call them the officer record brief or the enlisted record brief. They probably have equivalent on the other services. You could look at that one page of paper and know if they were fast tracking or not in a heartbeat. They had all the key jobs for the next job, but they didn't. And for the HR professionals and the hiring managers, they know exactly the same thing. And this is one of the key things that mentors can help with, is making sure that first impression, whether it's a piece of paper that's in an ATS cycle or piece of paper that's going before the mentor here or potential hiring, or recruiter, that you're putting that best foot forward, whether it be the digital picture or, the hard copy, because there is something to be said about the congruence of your digital profile and your paper profile, all right? All too many times, and the one thing I didn't hear was Facebook, and I have seen it, and it kind of goes back to some of my comments up front, is that what the person that's on Facebook is something completely different than who they are. And when you talk about culture, and a phrase that a mentor used just before I left the military was when we were kind of dealing with some issues, they called it a culture of accountability. When we were trying to improve the culture of accountability, there had to be that congruence, that whoever you were off duty is the same person you're on duty, and there needed to be that. So I'm not. If you say yes, we have, or we haven't looked at that, in the past.
I had an HR business partner. She would always check Facebook accounts,
Yeah.
so I can attest that it gets done.
Absolutely. Don't put anything there that you don't want a prospective employer to see.
So
Or your mother, for that matter.
Yeah. It's just social media is a wonderful thing, but it's just something to just be careful of, as you want to put your best foot forward. But thank you for all the preparation insights, the standard questions. I know that having gone through the process, DOL puts out a book. We've got the 28-day plan. There are questions. Again, you have the opportunity to talk with HR and mentors in the industry. Ask some of those questions. I'm sure they're not going to give you the script, but they can help coach you down the road to what to expect as you get there to the next step. And the last thing I'll say is, as I went through it a year ago from my personal experience, and I don't know if any of you guys do FaceTime or Skype interviews, I went through those. I did a series of 2 of those, and I got dressed up in a suit with a tie and, you know, went right through it. I thought it was a joke when I went through the transition course that the Army puts on. I'm like, there's no way this is going to happen. And then it happened, and I was like, you know.
But you were wearing shorts, right?
What's that?
You were
No,
wearing
I
shorts?
didn't. No, because I was warned about that. Be careful, don't stand up, you know, and your camera's off. But, you know, just every chance, just like you want to make a good first impression when you're reported into unit, the same thing applies. And I've coached and I've worked with veterans that they go into an interview and they're like, yeah, I really don't want to be here. It's like, come on, man. You made it all the way to the interview. I mean, you're that close. And then you opt out. You self-select. You know, a lot of people are putting time and energy. Make sure that you return that good favor when you get there. Okay. Next question, and we'll start to the far right with Chris. Is what's the one thing you believe would make one job candidate more competitive than another? As you go through, from an interview perspective or a preparation perspective.
Yeah, I think people who've taken the time to prepare, that really comes through in the interview setting, and people who've really thought about putting themselves in that role and having answers ready to demonstrate why they would be a good fit in that role. And I've interviewed plenty of people who haven't done that, and it just comes across as ingenuine, or just within the first 5 minutes you realize it's not the right person for the role. And the next 15 minutes of the conversation is painful because you've already made that assessment. So, I mean, I think preparation is key. Being able to clearly articulate and simplify, you know, what your experience is in a way that's meaningful to whoever you're interviewing with is key to success. Understanding what this role entails and why your strengths match that role, and also being humble as well and understanding what are your weaknesses or opportunities going into this role that you need to consider as well, and you've really thought about the full facet of it. One example, you know, from a people leadership standpoint, have you really thought about what it means to lead people in a corporate environment where you might potentially have to make that decision to fire somebody and impact their lifestyle outside of work? And do you really understand the implications of having to do that? And are you willing to kind of invest the time you need to go do those kind of things? So, so that to me, that's always what stood out. I can always tell when someone's really prepared and is taking the interview serious versus those who are just kind of winging it or haven't put a lot of preparation into it.
Thank you. So at the risk of being redundant, I would say preparation is definitely important. And it is very obvious right off the bat who's prepared and who hasn't. So great point. I would say, you know, on top of that, I always really respond to people who are engaged in the process, right? They're asking thoughtful questions. They've done research. I would suggest you ask everyone questions that gives them an understanding of wanting to know what their pain points are, wanting to understand what those problems are, and then being able to respond to that and say, here's how I can help address that. You are all the most qualified group of people I've seen assembled in one place in a long time. So you already have the skills that you need for this. You're problem solvers. I think just being prepared and anticipatory of what the hiring manager might need or what the hiring team might need, or even the peers who are on the interview panel. Like, what's really bothering you? How can I help to make your job easier? How can we work together to further the mission of this company? I think that engagement is really differentiating.
Again, two thoughtful responses that I agree with. Preparation is critical. The other part of it, to me, the fit. When you're there, maybe sometimes folks, and I'm definitely guilty of this, tend to think of a job interview as a board or as a quiz and competitive. And I prepared really hard. What year was this company founded, and you know, how many people work in this division? Those are maybe important things to know, but you know, the preparation should, in my opinion, be maybe 50% of what are these folks doing, and how can I help, and do I want to work here? What are the things that are attractive to me about this place? And an interview is when it's not like a board or a quiz or like a game show. You're not a game show contestant. When it's a really thoughtful discussion with folks about, am I going to fit here? You know, is this somewhere that I also want to work? I think you come from a much better spot when you think about it in a way of, is this somewhere I can see myself for you know, an extended period of time, and asking the questions that sort of drive you to feel like, yeah, I could totally see myself here, or not, and finding that out before you pass the game show, and then you realize, boy, I don't want to work here. This place is terrible. I should have asked about X, Y, or Z. I think everybody wins if you root out some of those things in the early part. But I think a military thing is to look at anytime there's people in front of you asking questions, you have to have the right answer and be responsive and be smart and sharp. And in an interview, it you know, maybe more of a discussion is better for everyone.
And I think it's important for you to realize you definitely have to be prepared, no question. But you also should realize that you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. You don't want to put yourself into a position or a job that you can't do. You don't want to set yourself up to fail. We don't want to set you up to fail either. So it really does go both ways. And I think that you need to relax. I find a lot of candidates who are just so nervous, they bomb the interview simply because of nerves. So I think you need to relax, be prepared, maybe practice. I've recommended to people that they video themselves on a mock interview. That's really helpful.
And I too agree that the preparation is absolutely critical. And a part of preparing for me in a way that you can differentiate yourself is actually coming into the interview and demonstrating what you know about Smith & Nephew and why you're passionate to be a part of our culture. So what do you know about our culture? What do you know about our products? What do you know about our business, our industry, and so forth? And it's interesting because my son is a rising senior. Feel like I'm traveling the country, taking him from school to school, and I've really begun to understand that the interview process, it's very similar to these kids going to college, right? The more, you know, he's applying to some very challenging schools, and what the admissions counselors have told him is the more you can articulate why you're going to make a difference, of why you want to be at this university, is what we want to see. And I think that really resonates with me in an interview as well.
Well, it sounds like everyone up here was in the Scouts of America at one time, because the motto could be just be prepared.
Right.
But, you know, the way I also frame it is, you know, at least in the military model, the 8 steps of the troop leading procedure, at least in the Army, and I don't know if the Marine Corps have the same one: inspect, rehearse, supervise. That's the last step. That guarantees generally, usually, almost always mission success. And that's, you know, the approach going into the interview. It's not as rigid. And I think that's a great point. I mean, you know, I look back in days in the military, and it's like you could have, you know, the smartest specialist in his jump boots and dress uniform jump through the door before a senior enlisted advisor, execute a parachute landing fall, jump up, salute, and they say, okay, you're promoted to sergeant. And because they had the bravado, and they just had that. That's not going to just carry the day. And that's where I think, you know, Shelley's point at the end is going to lead, you know, a great segue into the next question is about value, and how you articulate that to a company. But preparation is key. Again, personal war story. When I did my interviews, guess what? We're on either side of the camera. All the answers to every single question I anticipated. So that kind of gets to another point is, you know, anticipate. Just Google, what are the questions of the interview? How am I going to answer these behavioral health questions? Write out the answers and then just rehearse them. Just like you did any other operation that you did. It's the same song, different verse, so to speak. And last but not least, again, the cornerstone for MVP vets is our mentors. And so if you're unsure, and it can get very lonely, and this is one of the biggest things for me personally, is the loneliness that I miss from service, is the camaraderie, until you get accepted into that next tribe. into that next company. Is that amongst your veteran peers or the mentors that you have within MVP, they can be there and they can listen and they can share. It's not about necessarily compassion, but they will give you the honest answer that you're looking for. How did I do on that behavioral health question, behavioral question, okay? Situation question. And, go forward and continue to go through the drill and rehearse and rehearse and rehearse. So that being said, leverage your mentors. Don't let it stop here. So going back to Shelley's point about articulating your value, researching the company, and another point of how I can help, my next question, we'll start with Shelley, is how have you best observed a candidate describe their value to your company in interviewing with Smith & Nephew?
So diversity and inclusion is absolutely one of our most important strategic imperatives at Smith & Nephew. And so, I think articulating, how decisions you've made, projects you've worked on, where you've really made an impact. So when we acquire talent, we look to, to gain diversity, and that means many things, but it's also, methods of thought, trying things different, really driving to improve how we operate today. So where you can articulate, I think, my colleague mentioned that, past behavior is going to be a great indicator of future success. So where you have really articulated how you've made a difference, that's really where, obviously where you're able to demonstrate the value. I mean, I was in awe just listening to, the veteran panel and how, how you have made such a difference, obviously working in the armed forces. So really leveraging that, I mean, I'm sure, there are various different ways that you can do that, but really just focusing on, what difference have you made? How did you change things? How did you make them better?
Yeah, and definitely research the company. Find out what their core values are. Give us examples of how you have lived those core values in and out of the workforce. And, like I said, give us some examples. We have them all on our website, so if you can look those up, then we want candidates to come in and give us examples of that, because also Olympus is very big into diversity and inclusion and volunteerism and corporate social responsibility. And so we want to see people acting that way to be a fit for our organization.
Now, it's a slight disagreement. I wouldn't even call it a disagreement, but I would say a little bit of what I'm hearing sounded like understand what their core values are, study them, and make sure that you can form something that you've done to elucidate that, and if that's true, right? Not that they're suggesting that you would bend your truth to something that it isn't, but don't think of the answer that they want to hear. Think of what the true answer is, and if you're not a match for the culture there, then, maybe say that, and don't maybe say it. And that's a good point to say, maybe I'm not a great match for the culture here, or I don't really have a story that elucidates my whatever the core value is. But aside from that, I mean, I think it sounds a little trite if you come in, I noticed that honor, courage, and commitment were your core values. I could tell you a story about all three of those. I don't know if I'd want to have that person work in there. I'd probably think they were slightly disingenuous. But I would say that understanding what their core values are, and if they do match, then absolutely. And also have chambered a story or two that really showcase how you're a good fit for the position, if it's one that you're interested in. It's tough, and I know a lot of my friends and peers that are veterans don't like to brag. You really don't want to talk about the cool stuff you've done. This is the time that it's okay to do that, right? It's okay to say, well, I led a mission that did X, Y, and Z, and we faced diversity, and because of my leadership, we were able to overcome that diversity. That's a great story, and that's hard for people to do, is to say, I'm awesome. But this is the one time, and you can probably think of another few times, but this is the one time when it's genuinely okay to brag. So I would say do that then. Have a couple canned stories where you sound awesome.
Awesome. Thank you. I have a lot to say that kind of plays off of what my colleagues have said. I think, first things first, I would caution everyone, don't overthink this, right? We're all humans. Even the person that will be interviewing you sat on the other side of the table in the very same position. I didn't have any experience in med devices specifically, which is where I work now, but everyone gets through it. So just don't overthink it, because then you'll trip yourself up. Be confident. And be genuine. Being genuine is really important. It's important for you as the candidate, as has been mentioned, and it's important for the company as well. They sense that. I can speak specifically for Abiomed. We're a very mission-driven organization. It is patients first. Anything else that doesn't align with that is unimportant, and we probably shouldn't be doing it. So for us, it's really nice to hear, if you feel this way, why you want to work at Abiomed. Why do you want to be a part of our mission? And how are you going to help further the mission of patients first? If you can articulate that in an interview, I don't care if you're a PhD engineer or if you are a logistics specialist or production specialist. If you can explain how you're going to further the mission of our company and why you want to, you have stood out immediately, and it likely is a good match.
I agree with everybody, all the comments on the kind of the fit of the role, so I won't comment too much more on that piece. But I think one thing is when I look at resumes, a lot of times I get resumes that come in and it's basically, this is what your job description is, and those are the bullet points, right? And the resumes that really stand out to me are the ones that say, why were you so impactful in that role? Like, someone else could have accomplished that job and done it well, but why were you so special in that role, and how do you articulate that? And then be able to take those stories and bring them to the interview of what was it that you because you as a person had some kind of special effect to achieve that result. That's what you really got to try to bring that's going to separate you from those others, because a lot of times you'll sit in an interview and it's, okay, that was an average result, that wasn't great, you're telling me how you're doing your job, but why are you so special in that role, and what was it that you did to achieve that result? And kind of says some of the other points, you got to sell yourself. This is the time to do it. It's not comfortable. I hate doing it myself personally, but nobody else is going to do it for you. So you just got to take advantage, own it, sell yourself of why you're so special and what you've done throughout your career, and being able to articulate that in clear, simple answers.
Yeah, great. I think we've gone the full spectrum on the word humility. So within the culture, it's about we, us, and our. And at the interview, it's about me, my, and I. And so that's a change, that you got to make on the rheostat as you're moving forward, especially to that interview process. Then once you become part of the culture. I mean, I think there's some sociological studies that say it takes about 7 years for anybody in any of the branches of military, or even I would suggest in some of the companies, to really to become they. And a part of that organization and that culture 100%, to adopt all the norms, the beliefs that form a culture of an organization. But you got to make that shift to, the same part about the humility in transition, and to be able to ask for assistance rather than saying, can do, got it. I think it was, Charles, you said you were a CB, right? To start? Who said they were a CB to start? Somebody did. In the veteran panel. What's that?
I was an engineer, but it was full-time.
Oh, okay. So, that can do, or I got this, don't worry about it. You got to ask. And so that's kind of the humility spectrum. So we've got a few minutes left, so I'm going to ask the panel one final question. And this one's going to go after shortfalls, because this kind of gets after humility again. So we've talked about being able to articulate very clearly, and I would suggest to you that it's got to be in about 15 or 20 seconds, a vignette. And if you're able to penetrate and gain the interview panel's attention, then continue to elaborate or say, would you like to hear more or something. But what I'd like to hear now is stories from your experience or others that you've heard from of how a veteran has best articulated a shortfall other than, I work really hard. I can be a workaholic. I get the job done. What is a way in which you've heard it communicated effectively, that this person is identified, hey, this is something I need to work on, and whether they've come back with a strategy or something to turn that weakness into a strength for the betterment of the organization.
I think people that do it well, they obviously understand what their shortfalls are, but they've also got a good personal example of how they've applied it to make themselves better in the future. So if they're a workaholic, they've got a good personal example of how they go about setting those boundaries, and can walk you through that. And it's pretty easy to tell when it's genuine versus not genuine. So we all have our shortfalls. So I mean, I think nobody really cares that you have them. They just care more about what are you doing to manage those shortfalls moving forward. So, just acknowledge it, and you'll be humble in your thought process of how you're trying to control that moving forward.
I would say the same. Everyone has shortfalls, and when we ask about them during interviews, it's really to see what you learned from that. So sort of like an AAR, if things didn't go perfectly, why didn't they go perfectly, and what did you do to self-correct, either if it was you or your team? So just be prepared to acknowledge and then address what you would do to actually gain strength in that particular area. I had an amazing candidate. She was coming out of the Marines in California. She'd worked logistics. We were looking for somebody to be a leader in our logistics group in about a month or so. So kept her resume handy. She came in and interviewed. She, I think, probably was lacking a little bit of confidence in terms of the direct fit, coming out of the military so recently, but she blew the team away with her preparation. She knew that job description inside and out. She asked thoughtful questions, and when she was asked about something that she'd not yet had experience in or that didn't go so well for her in the past, she addressed it in a way that showed the team she was fully aware of how to overcome that and would actually make an incredible difference should the same thing happen at Abiomed.
That was a great story. I mean, it sounds like some Marine came out and wowed everybody. I mean, that's a common thing. Well articulated. I would basically say the same thing about a recent hire that we had who said, what are you concerned about? Where's your biggest weakness here? And he's like, I don't know anything about this industry. I literally know nothing about it. And everyone tries to maybe think of a coy way to answer the question of what's your biggest weakness. It's either I'm too smart or I'm too tall or I don't know. But the honest answer of I know nothing about this industry, and I'm really willing to put the hours in and learn what I need to learn. That brutal honesty with a plan to fix it, there's no better. I don't think there's a better answer.
Can I just add something to that? So that's really interesting. I think that speaks a little bit to that genuine thing too, right? So when you sort of level with your hiring team, you show them that you're human just like them. It speaks to humility. Like none of us are perfect, so just be prepared to say what you don't know. That means you're a better learner, I think, overall. And by the way, this Marine got an offer the same day. They couldn't wait to get an offer to her. So if that tells you anything about your future success, just keep that in mind.
You can't change what you don't acknowledge. We had a sales rep. We created an associate level sales rep position because we wanted somebody with a science background in education. We didn't care if they had any sales experience or not. We're willing to train for that. And so we interviewed this candidate who appeared to me to be very timid, and I thought, oh my goodness, we're going to put this person in front of a customer. But before I could even acknowledge any of that was going on, she said to me, you'll probably think I'm very nervous and that I'm not going to be able to handle myself in front of customers, but I think you should know that I'm currently enrolled in a public speaking class. I know that that's a shortfall of mine, and I am trying to improve that, because ultimately I do want to be in the sales force and use my education to sell products such as what Olympus offers.
I really don't know what more to say because I think everybody's covered it really, really well. I think self-awareness, demonstrating self-awareness and humility, which again, I was just in awe of how that was projected in the last panel, is important, and it really ties nicely into, I think, the type of culture fit that clearly Smith & Nephew is looking for. Before I hand over the microphone, though, I did want to note back to the LinkedIn comment. I will tell you that is our single largest source of hires globally is LinkedIn. So, and I'm sure other companies share that as well, but it is critically important, and I did want to leave you with that point as well.
Thanks for sharing, Shelley. So I know that we've got a few mentors that literally have got to fly. So you know, this has been tremendous. You know, keywords. If I were to kind of sum up the day before we go into breakout number 2, and I hope business cards or resumes and connections remain, and you continue to develop your network. Don't let this be the only one, but value, your values and character, the authenticity that you present, the preparation that you put into your transition. You're going to get out of it what you put into it, and don't be afraid to ask and take that risk. It's not, you know, it's a prudent risk, and it's the right thing to do as you make the transition. It's going to be okay. It's going to be way better than the worst day you could have possibly imagined downrange. Okay, it's going to be way better. It can be scary, but we can get through this together. And there's people in this room that want to see you succeed as much in the next phase of your journey in life and in the civilian workforce as much as you have in your service in uniform. So with that, please join me in a round of applause for the panel, as well as all of yourselves for being here. Thank you very much. And many happy returns to our mentors and veterans. The next one we'll have is on September 24th, which will coincide with the annual MedTech conference right here at the Seaport in Boston. So thank you very much. I'll be around the rest of the afternoon, and if you can stay for the Tyler Schultz, then please do so. Thank you.